Obama ushered in historic change with Cuba, engagement with Cuba, and it seemed a real fundamental change in the way politics and policy around Cuba happened in the United States. I mean, for many years, to win an election in the United States, you needed to pander to the Cuban American hardliners in Florida, and Obama seemed to seemed to break with that and engaging with Cuba, and it seemed like there was a political calculation behind it. In other words, I don't need them to win Florida, and he didn't. And so because of the changing demographics, it seemed the waning influence of the Cuban American community in Florida, greater numbers of Latin American immigrants from other parts of the Americas, younger, older Cuban Americans who are more sort of hardline in their views dying out, and younger generations not caring so much and not wanting this embargo to continue. And it seemed things had really changed, and there was no going back. In fact, during the Republican primaries in late 2015, early 2016, we interviewed Cubans about the Republican candidates and asked them what their thoughts were. And it was really interesting because a lot of them saw Trump not favorably. They all preferred the Democrat. They all preferred Clinton. But they didn't see Trump as a threat to Obama's policy. In fact, we have one great clip that is in the war in Cuba of a young man saying that it was irreversible. When we asked him, he thought things could change with the Republican candidate. He said, absolutely not. It's irreversible. You can't go back now. The cat's out of the box. It's over. But Trump was elected, and things did go back. And not only did they go back to how they were before Obama, it was even worse in some ways. There are some ways in which Trump's policy towards Cuba was worse than ever. For example, he implemented Title III of Helms-Burton, which allows for lawsuits in the United States, for example, against companies for allegedly trafficking in stolen property. So there are Spanish companies, for example, that have joint ventures with the Cuban government, hotels and whatnot, and they can be sued by, let's say, a U.S. citizen who's Cuban, who owned that property in the past, and it was nationalized, and that had never been done before. And that these lawsuits don't seem to be have a lot of potential for succeeding, but they've really been extremely damaging in terms of stopping foreign investment. It's just scared away foreign investors. Other things that, and then basically Trump just rolled back everything that Obama had done. So all of the tourism that from the United States that was occurring under Obama, an influx of tourists from the U.S., that stopped because they made it more difficult for U.S. tourists to go. The commercial flights continued, but they were scaled way back, so there were no more flights to the provinces, only to Havana. The cruise ships that were coming to the island stopped completely. He put, this is toward the end of the administration, put Cuba back on the state-sponsor terrorism list, which is also, it's not just a symbolic thing. It actually has a big impact because there are consequences to that, to dealing with a state-sponsor of terror for other governments and companies, banks, and so on. So it's another thing that strengthens the embargo and makes it more difficult for Cuba to have commercial relations with other countries. They did basically impose an oil blockade, so that Cuba had great difficulty in obtaining oil from Venezuela, and as a result, there was an energy crisis in Cuba. They're cut back remittances. Like right now, if you wanted to send me money, it would be very difficult to arrange that. You'd literally have to probably come here with cash to be able to get me money, because from the U.S. you can't do it. You used to be able to do it through Western Union. That's no longer possible. He carried out a very strong campaign against Cuba's international medical program. Cuba has doctors, 30,000 doctors around the world, in countries all around the world that are on missions. Many of them are altruistic, and Cuba receives nothing in return. But in some cases, Cuba does receive money in return. They use that money to subsidize their healthcare system. And in the case of, for example, Brazil, Ecuador, Bolivia, those doctors were sent home, and Cuba, in Bolivia, it didn't matter because Cuba wasn't making any money there. But Brazil, they did receive a fair amount of money, and they used that money again to subsidize the healthcare system. So that was gone. So they've sort of attacked, the U.S. government has attacked Cuba on all fronts. And even before COVID hit, the situation was very bad. And in fact, in the war in Cuba, one of the people we interviewed says that things were getting as bad as they were during the special period in the 90s after the fall of the Soviet Union, when Cuba was in a major depression. And then COVID hit, and it was like whatever Trump was unable to do, COVID has done. So the economic situation is very dire right now. The sanctions have not lifted, and they've only intensified under COVID, under Trump, and Biden has basically, it's been the status quo so far. And while there's a lot of hope with Biden being elected that he would reassume Obama's policy, having been the vice president under Obama, and having brought in his administration some people who were very pro-engagement and directly involved in engagement. So far, that hasn't happened, and his administration's given every indication that at least in the short term, it's not going to happen. In fact, his special assistant Juan Gonzalez, who's also the National Security Council, the person in charge of the National Security Council for Latin American policy, came out and has said to the New Yorker and also in CNN publicly that he said that Biden is not Obama when it comes to Cuba policy, that they are not going to invest political capital in the short term, and essentially he's alluding to Florida and the fact that there will be a political cost for reversing Trump's policies. It will cost them votes in Florida potentially, and it's just not something that they want to do in the short term. They might do some measures like restore the ability to send remittances and try to make travel for family members easier. But outside of that, they're not going to do much. Oh, there's one other thing that Trump did, which is very significant. He basically closed the embassy because of alleged sonic attacks, which by all accounts, all the evidence we have, were neither sonic nor attacks. There's no evidence of either. Based on this idea of these attacks, alleged attacks by Cuba or Russia or some enemy of the United States, and again, no evidence of attacks, but based on that, they shuttered the embassy, which makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for Cubans to get a visa, to travel to the United States. If you're a Cuban, you want to get a visa right now, you've got to go to Guyana or Mexico or Colombia, spend thousands of dollars, wait there for 2 weeks while the whole process is taking place. And even then, they reject about 80% of the visas. So for most people, even well-known musicians who have contacts, who are getting invitations to travel and so on, they can't go. And so that's had a huge impact on Cuba's economy and culturally as well, and as far as just exchanges and with the United States. And there isn't any indication Biden's going to change that, because Gonzalez also said, and this is really telling, he said when he was asked about this question about restoring consular services, he said, yeah, the thing is, we can't do that because of the threat to our diplomats, because of the microwave attacks, or whatever it is they're calling it these days. He literally said, whatever it is they're calling it these days. In other words, he didn't really seem to give much importance of whatever it is they are calling it. And they are calling it microwave attacks now. It's no longer sonic attacks. Now it's microwave attacks, although there really isn't any evidence of any such weapon, microwave weapon, that could inflict the damage that supposedly was caused on these diplomats. So there's no really evidence that they were microwave either. And the most recent study that came out about that from the National Academy of Sciences said that the microwave that the microwave attacks was it didn't say that there were microwave attacks. It said that of all of the possibilities we've considered, this seems to be more likely than the others, but basically still no evidence and still probably not likely to have occurred. But it still is being used politically as a pretext to not reopen the embassy. And to take that on and to reopen it would be, obviously, for Biden, assuming political costs, and it's one that the administration doesn't seem willing to assume. In the meantime, Cubans, the economy here is just in dire straits. It's really bad. The Cubans are waiting for hours in line to get food. There are increasing scarcities of food, medicine. antibiotics, basic things that even during the sanctions under Trump there were, but now with COVID and the further tightening of sanctions, it's even harder. I spoke recently with an official who was telling me that for example, banks that they were dealing with in Europe and Switzerland, they're having more and more difficulty dealing with. They're not accepting their transactions, and that the embargo is difficult because it's not necessarily that the Cuba can't get this medication from the United States and they can only get it from the U.S. Usually you can get a medication from another country, but let's say Cuba wants to do business with India for a generic drug. Well, then the problem is not doing business and getting the drug from India, but it's sending the money to India because the banks there won't accept the money, because if they do, they could be fined essentially by the U.S. So it's very difficult for Cuba to do business. The cost, it makes it so that the cost for Cuba for obtaining anything from outside is far higher than it would be otherwise, and the result are scarcities here on the ground. So things are very difficult now, and the hope is that the vaccine, which is in the final phases right now and is coming, it will be rolled out very soon, will sort of open the country up to tourism again and allow the economy to get rolling once again.